Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special edition of Inside Story, author to author, with Louise Minchin here on Goldster. Louise, welcome to Goldster.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. I'm very excited.
You must be exhausted because your new book, Fearless, came out on the 25th of this
Yes.
month, and you don't seem to have stopped. You've been absolutely everywhere.
I'm not exhausted. I just think it's running on adrenaline and it's also excitement because I've obviously spent a long time with this book and it's like having a baby or something. It's out in the world and it's super exciting. And I love talking about it. I loved the launch was amazing because there's 18 women in this book, and we'll come to them in a minute. But 11 of them came to my
Oh,
launch,
brilliant.
which was just so wonderful. And that meant that it was in the Story House in Chester, which is a theatre and a beautiful community centre. And I, much to their surprise, told them all that they were going to come on stage, and I interviewed all 11 of them in sort of batches,
Oh,
and it was
fantastic.
just so wonderful to be able to tell their story. So yeah, I think I'm sort of buzzing. I think there will come a moment when I hit the wall.
So tell us, in a nutshell, the premise of this book and what led you to write it.
Okay, so the premise is it's 17 different chapters, 18 different women, and each chapter is dedicated to a different person, apart from one. You'll notice the 17 and the 18, which has got two sisters in it, because on the day I was meant to be one, but two of them came and I couldn't possibly separate their stories. So they're in it. Each chapter is dedicated to what amazing women who I think are trailblazers in the world of sport. They're running the furthest distances, climbing the highest mountains. And in my view, and I know you'll ask me about it in a second,
Your
I don't think that women's stories get celebrated as much as men's stories. So what I did was I wanted to find all these women who are doing incredible things. And then being me, I mean, I could have just sat home and done it on Zoom like this. But I decided that I would go and interview them while they did the thing that they loved. So it's a huge adventure, 17 different adventures, including rugby and indoor climbing and lots of different things. But I think you get a very different kind of conversation when you're doing something with someone rather than doing a sort of interview, sort of formalized interview.
But you've already done remarkable things yourself anyway. I mean, you're kind of underselling yourself there by saying, I'm going out to meet all these women who are doing amazing things. Tell us how you got from the BBC Breakfast sofa, as most people here will know you from, to where you are at the moment. What happened on the way?
I took a sort of deep breath. Um, so, um, so I presented breakfast, lots of you will be aware, for 20 years. And I had a sort of an epiphany moment when my life, and it sounds a bit over the top, but genuinely changed in a moment. And the wonderful thing for me is that moment I have recorded. It went out on national television. So what it was it was 2012, and I just started working permanently on BBC Breakfast, actually. And my producer came up to me and said, Louise, we're looking sort of after the summer in 2012, we're looking to do a Christmas special, some sort of competition between the presenters. What do you think we should do? And I thought, well, I know they've done cooking and I know I've been on Celebrity MasterChef, but I thought, there's something more interesting that we can do. Why don't we do something inspired by, guess what were we all doing in 2012 in the summer? I was
Olympics.
glued to the Olympics, glued. I love sport. I love watching sport. I particularly love big years like that. So I said, why don't we do something inspired by that? And she went away, she thought about it, and she came back, she said, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the velodrome. We're going to cycle, you and your co-presenters are going to have a race in the velodrome against each other. It's going to be timed. It's going to be in front of 4,000 people. What do you think? I just looked at her, I was like, okay, so I've never been in a velodrome. I've never sat on a racing bike. These bikes have no brakes. They have fixed wheels. So when you stop, you don't stop. Your feet keep going round because your feet are attached to the pedals. Anyway, so it was super, super challenging. And on the practice day, I screamed the first time I went around the track. Second time I went around the track, I thought, oh, I quite liked. Third time I went around the track, I thought, oh my gosh, I love this. And on that night, it was so intense. I can still feel the intensity of walking into the velodrome on the race night, because there are 4,000 people packed in there and they're all stacked up against the sides. And my lovely co-presenter, Bill Turnbull, who I'm sure lots of you will remember, was overheard saying, I can't be beaten by a girl. No, that's not going to get me. There's nothing that's going to get me. Anyway, on the night, the moment my life changed was, so I'll try and do this briefly because it's such a long story, but so Charlie and myself, our times were going to be added together, and Bill and Susanna's times were going to be added together. Charlie went so fast that basically I didn't, if I just did the circuit and didn't fall off my bike, we would win. But Bill had said that thing about being beaten by a girl. And the moment I was holding onto the safety rail and I had this decision to make. I'm going to win anyway. So I could just like take it easy and sail around, be safe, or I could just go for it. And I just let go and I absolutely went for it. And I beat him by something ridiculous, like half a second, 500ths of a second, whatever. It was something so ridiculous. And when I went over that finishing line, I just thought, oh my gosh, I forgot how much I love sport, how much I love competing. I'd given up competitive sport 30 years earlier.
Wow.
And the next week I bought a bike. I bought a racing bike. I mean, I'd never even sat on a racing bike before that night. Everything, the ridiculous shorts, the shoes, the helmet, the gloves, the whole lot. My husband said, you're never going to race that bike. I've raced that bike in world and European triathlon championships. I've done 2 of the hardest triathlons in the world, and I still ride that bike. So I've had really good value for money.
Brilliant. And so you went from being a TV presenter to being a triathlete. I love that.
I did that because I did my first triathlon about 9 months afterwards, because again, a friend of mine, I'm very susceptible to ideas. A friend of mine had said, oh, I've seen you riding a bike, I've seen you running. Have you thought of doing a triathlon? And again, I'm like, oh gosh, what even is that? I knew the Brownie brothers were really good at it. I knew the sports, but I didn't, which is obviously swimming, cycling, running. I didn't know at that time that was the order. You did the sports. There was so much I didn't know. Anyway, on my first triathlon, having been a competitive swimmer, I thought that would be fine. But it was in open water in the Dee River near Chester, and I had a sort of panic attack in the water because I
Oh
couldn't see where I
God.
was going. On the run, I was when my family couldn't see me, I wasn't running. It was pretty disastrous. But I loved it. I literally went over the finish line with a massive stitch. I don't think I'd run 5K before that day, honestly. So mad now. And I went over the finishing line crying, looked up, looked down, went, I want to do it again. And then the jump to going to World and European Championships, which is obviously a massive leap, age 45. I started doing more triathlons and seeing that people had little triathlon suits with their name and GBR written on the bum, basically. And I was like, what is that? And then I found out if you went to a qualifying triathlon and got a qualifying time, you could represent the GB team in your age group. And that, again, I just thought, what an amazingly ridiculous idea that my job is reading out loud and sitting on a sofa. And actually, I might be able to represent my country in a sport. So I went for it.
Fantastic. And it's such a great story. The other thing I loved about it is that you were inspired because other women were not getting the kind of time that you were getting on BBC Breakfast. And so you thought, I'm going to fix this. So
Yeah,
tell
I'm
us
I'm a
about
bit
that
of a
moment.
I think I'm a bit of a fixer. I think when I spot things, I notice, I kind of notice stuff. And what I notice about what you're referring to, and that's in the beginning of my book, and very much one of the reasons I wrote this book was so I'd had an equal pay battle at the BBC, which is well publicized and all the rest of it, with many of other BBC women. We found out, and I can't even remember the date actually, but it's on my wall because I made the front page of the Sun newspaper, which I've obviously kept, and it's on my wall in my study. Anyway, so I would know if I looked there. Anyway, so I had a long drawn out equal pay battle, which was, hard won. And these things, I don't take these things on lightly, actually. I mean, I laugh about the triathlon, but if you're going to go in and change things, you need to, with triathlon or whatever it is, you need to put in the effort. So that was long and difficult battle. And then I noticed after that pretty much always the women, or when I was on BBC Breakfast, and again, it wasn't necessarily the case before I was on BBC Breakfast, by the way, and other
Right.
times gone past. So I know. But when I was on, often, the man would say hello first, do the first interview, basically at 6, at 7, at 8, and at 9. This would happen pretty much every day. And I just thought, gosh, what are we telling our audience? What are we telling the women who are there about who's in charge here? And I've been there for many, many years at that point. And I just thought, what does that say? That if I'm always number two, what does that say to everybody else who's watching?
Mm.
Young girl, I mean, men, women, girls, boys, whoever it is, what does that say about hierarchy and equality? And I just thought, right, okay, how do I change this? Because, I like challenges and changing things. And I just thought, right, what I'll do is I'll just note it down, see how often this happens. And I was right. It was most of the time. And I went to my boss and said, I've noticed this thing's happening. And he said, no, it's not. And I said, do you want to see my notes or not? And anyway, long story short, and it got changed. It got changed from then on. And it meant that every day, we flip flopped. So one day I would be the lead, and the next day the man sitting next to me would be the lead. But anyway,
Brilliant.
so yes, that's
See, that's just amazing. And that kind of change, that girls sitting at home watching, is so important. And it seems staggering sometimes we're still doing this. I read a book a decade ago about the suffrage movement, and I was staggered by how frequently there was a reference to something that was happening 100 years later in the present day. And sometimes you just think things haven't changed. So
but they can go
making those kind of
backwards.
moves is so important.
They can shift and go backwards. So, for example, I know that it didn't always happen before, and so for some reason it had just slipped into that happening again.
Yeah.
So I think it's difficult to spot it, but it's very subtle, isn't it? And 30 years ago, I wrote a dissertation actually about the portrayal of women in the media, and I looked into the makeup of newsrooms and how women, where were their particular stories where women were featured. So for me, it had always been something that I was alert to. But yeah, I think it's sometimes different. But it's subtle messaging, isn't it? If you're sitting at home and I'm always Louise Minchin, who we've known for years, is always number two, you sort of think, so when do I get to move up to be number one, or just occasionally?
I mean, it's a really important step forward. And so then you decided to do this book because you realized, as it says in your introduction, which I found really inspirational, that all these people who were being featured were all men in the...
Well, no. So what happened was, so having done those two, obviously it was playing on my mind and in my subconscious, and I, having become then an endurance athlete and really interested in those are the stories that I love, the stories sort of bravery and endeavor and courage, and I noticed that all those stories about people climbing the highest mountains and running the longest races and all the rest of it seemed to be starring men again. And at that point I thought, okay, well, first of all, am I right? I mean, you could argue for a long time about that, but I think I probably got pretty close to the truth. It's not always, but there certainly is a preponderance to hear those stories. And I just thought, is it that women aren't doing this, or is it that we're not hearing their stories? And I think the book is the answer to that question.
Yeah,
there are amazing women all over the world doing really brave, intrepid stuff, and we need to celebrate those stories. And that's what the book is. It's a real celebration of women doing amazing things.
And so tell us about the research process, first of all. How did you find these particular women to put in your book? What was it about them that led you to them?
Yeah. So actually it started a bit back from that. So first of all, I realized that I really wanted to write this book. And, you know what it's like. There's a process. It just doesn't happen like that, does it? You have to take it to your publisher. So luckily Bloomsbury had already published my book about triathlon, which was called Dare to Try. TRI, obviously. So we had long discussions about what I was going to write next. And I did want to write something, but I don't think you can write, I certainly can't write unless I'm feeling it. So it took a long time. And then literally one day in makeup, I was like, this is the book I want to write. I knew that's what I wanted to write. But again, you have to get it past the sales teams, obviously, they're investing enormous amounts of money. So I did a proposal where there are about 10 different women in the proposal, and I've still got it actually upstairs. I looked at it the other day, and for example, I'll just give you a couple off the top of my head. One of them was Lucy Gossage, who is a 14 world Ironman winner, 14 times world Ironman winner. And Ironman is really tough triathlon, very long distance triathlon. It ends with a marathon, by the way. At the same time as being a cancer oncologist. So she has been through medical exams, all the rest of it, a really grueling job at the same time as winning Ironman. So amazing. And then the other one was somebody called Kath Pendleton, who is an ice swimmer. She's also known as the Merthyr Mermaid. And she had swum the southernmost ice mile in the Antarctic Circle. She's a mother of two from Merthyr Tydfil, and she's absolutely awesome. So they were in my proposal. So I had people who I knew I wanted, and then I had things that I knew I wanted. So there was this, for example, an event I really wanted to do, the swim from Alcatraz. So basically, you jump off near Alcatraz and then you swim back to San Francisco. So I knew that also wanted to be. And then we just opened it out. We had a big meeting, 3 of us, and we just, we had what was so inspiring about that meeting, there were so many women who could have made it into the book. And obviously there's only space. There's only so much me.
Yep.
I'd committed to doing everything. So there was the time involved in that. And I wanted it to be in lots of way diverse, but really importantly from the different sports as well, because I wanted to, everybody who's reading it, and hopefully you all will, by the way, I wanted them to be able to find a way in somewhere that they might be, whether it's indoor climbing or stand-up paddleboarding. We do go for a couple of walks as well.
Yeah.
But lots of a plethora of different sports in there as well. But yeah, and it came down to, what I could do, and I found the whole year was quite challenging, because one day I'd be training for a swim and the next week I'd be doing a half Ironman. So all the time I was like, oh my gosh, right, what's next? How am I going to get ready for it?
So I was wondering about the time frame. So you did all of this in 1 year?
I did it in 13 months.
And that was, and having had COVID twice at some point.
I had COVID twice in that year. Oh yeah. And I think I went when I'm a celebrity.
Wow. So that is
and had a knee operation.
Oh my goodness. You had a knee operation, you still did all this. That is phenomenal.
The book really changed from the first inception of it, because I mean, right, there's women are particularly good, for example, in endurance sport, running. Okay, we're doing really well. I say we, it's not me, by the way. And so I really thought there would be lots of runners in the book, but because I was injured, there is only one run. And I think actually that was a good thing, because otherwise it would be very easy to have gone and, done a whole series of amazing runs with amazing women. But I think it's a more interesting book because I couldn't do them.
So the emotions that you experience, they come across really forcefully in your book. For example, there's often a kind of sense of claustrophobia, or maybe that's just me.
Oh yeah,
no. My own fears. I mean, you mentioned the swim from Alcatraz. You can't, when you get in the water and you can't see any of the other swimmers, you feel something brushing against you in the water. When you were writing it, I just wondered how far after doing them, did you write each one up after you came back, and or did you do it all in one go? And did those emotions just keep coming back to you?
I mean, I did a mixture of all of that. So, so Alcatraz was the last one that I could do. So I did that in October, so last October, and I think it had to be in the book 10 days later. So, and I was already, I think I was like over the deadline, but obviously we really wanted to get Alcatraz in. So I did that pretty much immediately. There are others that, for example, it sounds really silly, but I did some before I went into I'm a Celebrity, and then didn't have time to write them up. So, but I think I have, they're very visceral for me, and that's why I wanted it to be like that. That's what I really love taking part. And I just think for me, actually, and we'll go back to one of the ones I did before I'm a Celebrity, was Z, when I played rugby in this pouring biblical rainstorm, and I can still feel the rains kind of like lashing me and all the rest of it. I think when I do something physical, and actually that was really interesting writing my last book, Dare to Try, it sears itself on my memory in a way that, in fact, I could probably still write a similar piece now about rugby, even though I did it, a year and a bit ago. So it is I'm glad it feels visceral. And the claustrophobia thing, I really have claustrophobia. So trigger warning, everybody, there's a couple of chapters. If you've got claustrophobia, you might want to watch out for cave exploring.
I have no idea how I get claustrophobic. I have no idea how you did that cave one, because I was feeling panicky reading it, thinking that is definitely a stage too far. How on earth did you prepare for that mentally?
Well, and again, back to Alcatraz, I think in some ways the book should it have a trigger warning? There's a couple of chapters that there's the cave exploring, then there's ice diving, which genuinely people are having anxiety dreams about, which is not my
Yeah.
intention, everybody. It was not my intention to write it like so that you'd have but maybe that's the title of a good book. I don't know. It was wild caving, and I'm sure lots of you may have done a bit of potholing perhaps when you were children. No, I hadn't.
I just wouldn't.
I hadn't either, by the way. And it was this amazing lady called Christine Grossart, who is she's an offshore paramedic. She's she really is extraordinary. She is a cave explorer. So she scuba dives in caves. And they're not really caves, they're small, tiny tunnels filled with water. And which I went with her in the Mendip Hills, and I just sort of imagined that we would be walking into a nice cave, and there'd be some stalagmites and some stalactites, and we'd walk to the end of it and all be beautifully lit, and then we might sort of, go through a slightly narrow corridor. Nope. The first thing we did was literally lower myself into a very tight triangle, dark triangle, onto a slippery, rocky slope, climbing through water drenched small spaces with the only light we had, obviously because it's wild caving, was the torches we had. And there was this one moment, wasn't there, when we turned off the torches. I felt like I was being overwhelmed by this it was like being in a black hole. It was utterly terrifying. And then, so mentally, how do I prepare? I think, one of the reasons I've written the book, and hopefully people read it and like it, is to what I get out of pushing my boundaries, right? I'm not sure I got anything out of this one. But what I did was really rely on all the things that I've learned over doing, really hard, like one of the triathlons I did, two of them, in fact, the Norseman and Patagon Man, I jumped off a ferry in the dark into a fjord, actually, where orcas swim. So that for me is really scary. And I just know how to have a little quiet word with myself. And I did in that cave. I just sat at the front, and there was three of us, and I had to be at the front because that was less claustrophobic, and just say, look, Louise, you need to calm yourself down, because I'm calming myself down. The less you panic, the easier this is going to be. But if you panic, this is going to be very, very hard. So I think it's, I do have, not always, an ability to realize when my thoughts are sort of spiraling into making it really hard for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was scary. And then honestly, so it's 2 hours, and that the whole thing is 2 hours in. So there's no rescue. They would come and rescue us. Other cavers would come and rescue us, but there's no shortcut. There's no emergency exit. There's no helicopter coming to pick you off the top or anything. Utterly terrifying. Anyway, I hope you love it, everybody.
Did you have to do things like tell them what time you were going in, and then hope that if you didn't come out by a certain time,
she did that. Oh yeah. And then the other thing about the women in this book, that one of my great learnings from all of them was, none of them, some of the stuff they do is risky. Okay, that is definitely risky, and you wouldn't do it unless you were knew how to do it, and B, had told people where you were. They all plan meticulously, absolutely meticulously. So yeah, she totally had that under control.
So what was the most terrifying moment when you were
that's kind of like, it's hard, because I talk about sort of having real fears and fears which are not really real. So my fear in the cave was probably the most fearful I felt was in the cave. But actually, it's not very realistic, is it, that in all the millennia that mountain has been there, that it would choose the moment that I'm in it to squash me? It's unlikely. Okay. But I think real fear, I really felt the fear when Mimi Anderson, who's actually an endurance runner turned cyclist, and I were attempting to cycle across Argentina, and which was a journey of like over 1,000 kilometers. And we were on a dual carriageway, and you would never, choose to cycle on a dual carriageway in the UK. I think it's illegal anyway. But that was our only option, and we'd had the safety vehicle behind us the whole time, and they'd had to go to help another rider, and I just suddenly got the fear. I just thought, it was so hot. We were tiny, they were on our tiny bicycles, these trucks going past us at 60, 70 miles an hour, and I just thought, actually, this is a step too far. This is actually really risky, and I don't need to be here, and I don't want to be here. I need to get off my bicycle now. And I told Mimi, and we just immediately got off our bikes, went and stood in the shade, took a moment, waited for the safety trap and went back. So that was probably when I felt really actually in real danger.
And I'm so glad that you went with that instinct. I mean, how...
Well, I think actually, thank you, because Mimi was brilliant, because she's a proper, she runs, endurance races for fun, and then runs back to the, runs to the finish and back to the start again. She is hard as nails. You read it. She really is. And actually, she was amazing, because she was just like, if that's what you feel, we get off. You have to trust your instinct.
Absolutely.
And it was amazing.
So important. Wow. So what was your writing process? We talked a little about some of the amazing things you've done, and I would like to come back and talk about the women themselves. But did you kind of keep diaries, voice notes, send emails? When did you kind of write it all down?
Just fiddling with my microphone. I'm having to hold it up a bit. Can you hear me still properly?
Yes,
Everybody?
we can.
Yes,
Yeah.
good. What was my process? So it sort of changed, actually. So when I first started, I would like record, like when I was with Z playing the rugby, for example, I would record, like put a microphone. I had these tiny little brilliant microphones, actually, and record hours of audio. But, that becomes very, very time consuming. So what I learned to do was do voice notes. So I'd be, here I am, I'm just walking across the rugby club. It looks like this, or I'm driving through Cloud towards Snowdonia or Iredi, and this is how it feels, and this is what the atmosphere is like. So I do a little bit of voice notes, which was the most useful. I used to take lots of photographs, because again, it might be working in television, actually. I have a very visual way of remembering things. So if we were on a path, I would take a picture of the path. I got lots of what seem like really boring photos on my phone, but for me, they're very, very helpful. And I'd record a little bit with the women along the way. And then what I would do is I'd come home, and I always wanted to find the hook. I think every chapter starts somewhere. They don't start at I drove up to the car park and I got out the car.
No.
They start with something brushed against my leg as I swept.
But that's great, because it takes the reader right in. I mean, it's a really well written book. It's a very easy to read book. And you feel that you're there with you. I mean, I really felt like, as I said, at times I felt claustrophobic, at other times I felt very excited. So you obviously really managed to keep in that moment when you were writing it.
Yeah. So for me, as soon as I could find the hook, and often I would really know what the hook was. Like, I think with Alcatraz, that's something, and I'm going to leave it to your imagination. What brushed against my leg. It was very gentle. I knew the hook. Other ones I didn't quite know the hook. But as soon as I found that, then I would sort of like arrange it, because we have to get, because they would often happen towards the end or in the middle of the story. So I'd have to find my way back to that story. And it was really fun doing that. And there were things, what I'd do is I'd go over the conversations I'd had with the women, and particular things that struck me that I think had resonance. And sometimes what I'd do is I'd write the chapter. I'd obviously read it about 1 million times, and then pick up with them, do a very brief interview on the phone, which again I would record, and then just pick up some of the thoughts that needed to go in particular places in the chapter.
And have you always wanted to write? I mean, obviously you're a journalist, so you write journalism, but have you always wanted to write books as well?
I wanted. I used to write really boring stories when I was a child.
I think we all did.
Did we?
No one would believe I became a professional writer if they read my childhood stories.
My daughter, actually, one of my daughters is really, again, very visceral writer. I mean, her writing is exquisite. So I was not that. I did always, in my head want to write, and I suppose Dare to Try was I was very lucky, because I'd been thinking about that, thinking, I really should write down some of this stuff when I was doing all the triathlon, but I hadn't written down literally one note on it.
Wow.
When somebody from Bloomsbury came to me and said, we'd like you to write what happened. But I already knew then I wanted to write. So that was brilliant for me. And I just really love it. I find I get lost in it in a way that the only other place I find I get as lost is sort of like going for a long walk, or in these adventures. I just find the whole thing super exciting, super rewarding, and the most wonderful time-consuming thing to do.
Oh yes. So who are the writers who inspire you?
Oh gosh, writers who inspire me. I mean, Kate Moss has been amazing, and she's Moss with an E. You'll all be aware of her, the most fabulous writer. And she's sort of she's so been, and she's also chair, well, she's not chair of the Women's Prize. I'm chair of the Women's Prize for fiction because she asked me. And
So
she's
tell
been
us
asked,
about this. Tell us about your role in this.
oh, I'll just explain Kate first of all. So she's been asking me for years actually, but I always knew that I wanted to do it, but I knew I couldn't do it, and I was doing BBC Breakfast. So she's a brilliant writer, and I love her because she's been so helpful with me on my writing journey. I think, first of all, when Bloom 3 came to me, I went to her and asked her, her advice, and she's been utterly brilliant. So yes, so chair of the Women's Prize. I think we had a joke about it the other day. I think she first asked me to be a judge about 10 or 12 years ago.
Right.
But I won't take on challenges unless I know I can do them.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a possibility. I've got the time, let's say the time and the investment to do them. So yeah, she asked me, I always said to her, I said, no, that's lovely. I'll do it when I finish breakfast. The first person that emailed me when I said I was leaving breakfast was Kate.
To make sure you made good
To
on your
ask
promise.
me if I could be a judge on Women's Prize. And then again, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm a celebrity. It's coming up so much in this
That's fine.
particular conversation. And then I couldn't do it because I was doing I'm a Celebrity. So then she asked me again this year, and then she said, actually, we don't want you to be judge, we want you to be chair. And I just thought, oh gosh,
So what
wow.
does that involve? What does
Well,
being chair of the Women's Prize for Fiction mean?
it means, I mean, physically, it means reading over 80 books.
Mhm.
It means, so there's 5 of us. It means sort of marshalling the marshalling, well, not marshalling, just, help. What do I do? I chair the meeting. So every meeting we have, I'm nominally in charge. And making sure that all of our opinions are heard about the books, that every book gets a fair hearing in the room, which they have done, and it's been utterly amazing. I've absolutely loved it. I've loved the reading because it's pushed me again in lots of different areas. There's books that I would never have picked up that I've picked up and have absolutely adored, some of which are on now, both the long list, now the short list. And I just thought, actually, when she asked me, all this, my book now, Fearless, is all about women, pushing boundaries and facing challenges. And I thought, if I'm writing about this stuff, telling people, oh, this is a good thing, I need actually to say yes and do this, even though it's going to be, a huge and onerous and prestigious task as well.
We've got quite a few comments that have come in now. One says, I love Kate Moss. I can really get lost in her writing. I agree. Amazing writer. A comment here, I really enjoyed Fearless. It's a great read.
Oh,
So
wow, you read it
there you are.
already. Oh my
I know,
gosh,
that's
thank you
pretty,
so much, because you
came
haven't
out
had
5 days
long.
ago.
Wow.
Wow. We've got a comment here. Well done, Louise. This is about your BBC Breakfast and taking on that,
Yep.
changing the dynamic. I did a women's studies course in the early 90s. It was shocking to see how sidelined women reporters were in our national newspapers.
Gosh.
And if you read history books, it seems there were so few women in those days.
Well, I mean, there's so much, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of change of that around that now, isn't it? And Kate Moss, in fact, have I got her, it's called Warrior Queens, is her and she did a show, actually, don't know if any of you seen it, all about, looking back through history and the kind of women who are either sometimes literally written out or forgotten or sidelined. So there's a lot around that. And actually, people have been surprised with my book, thinking that I was going to talk about historical figures, but it's relevant. It's not,
Yeah.
you don't have to look to history.
You really don't have to look to history. We've got a comment here. As a physiotherapist, I was lucky to work in a largely female environment, but the problem with this is things like pay for female jobs like nursing still exists.
I mean, we've got to keep working at it, haven't we?
I'm going to ask you some other tips about keeping healthy in a moment, but I've got one here, one question. Louise, how did you sit so still on that BBC couch for so
This
many
is
years?
such a good
It is
question.
a great question.
Thank you to that
Thank you, Liz.
person,
Liz asked that question.
because I don't know, because I clearly do not sit still. I mean, I'm just such a doer, getter upper and goer and all the rest of it. So, and actually, one of the things I admire most in other presenters is stillness. So I'm not sure I was still. I mean, I was on that sofa, but, I have a busy mind, and I think that's what it was. My mind was very focused. You're on for 3.25 hours. You've got 6 million people watching. When that red light goes on, there was nothing like the focus that I would had. So that is how I sat still, because my mind was busy. But yeah, it was definitely, I mean, it was definitely against my nature in some ways to be sitting there.
I've always admired artists' models for being able to just sit for so long.
They
I could
must
not even sit for a life class. There's no way I can't do it for 2 minutes. So
they must go into sort of like a Zen-like state, mustn't they?
they must. They really must. And they must just not feel any
Yeah.
physical discomfort. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the representation of women in
Hmm.
sport, because there's a particular, if you don't mind, I'm going to quote from you. In your chapter about swimming in San Francisco Bay with kind of 200 people, you write,
Mm.
"It's a strange sensation. I have never been surrounded by so many people wearing so little. It feels like a warm and wonderfully unself-conscious celebration of the human body in all its shapes and sizes." And you talk about this again and again. I particularly noted in the chapter about Kath Pendleton, there's so much emphasis in the world on the perfect body shape. And not just on women. I mean, that's happening more with men now, although it
Hmm.
still seems to be overwhelmingly with women. What's your feeling about the way this is portrayed in the media, and perhaps even more insidiously in social media? And how do we change that?
Well, I mean, I'm not well, hopefully this book changes it, and hopefully in some ways. Do you see what I mean? I just think it did run through, not every single chapter, I don't think, but there were definitely different places where it surfaced. And I'm quite honest in the book about my own thing about body image was, and I mentioned right at the beginning of this interview, didn't I, about giving up sport when I was 30 years ago. And the reason that I had done that was because I was a really good competitive swimmer with what I would say now, a wonderful swimmer's body. So, muscly shoulders, muscly back, etc. And what had happened was I'd grown up with people, I was a tomboy. I'm still a tomboy, if that's even a word we can use now, actually. And I'd grown up with people going, "Oh, you're right, laddie," and all, and just things sort of seeped in. And I just looked at my body one day and I thought, "Oh gosh, I'm not sure those muscles. I think they I think they make me look too masculine." And that was 30 years ago,
So
without
tough as
social media,
teenagers. Yeah, without social media. Imagine now that
without the
stress.
pressure.
Yeah.
So all I can do, I think, and I'm just going to make this personal because the political is complicated. I'm sort of not qualified. Is just celebrate our bodies for what they can do, not for what they look like. I mean, I love my body because it can get me across a country on a bicycle. I mean, that to me is just blows my mind. Do you see what I mean? And Mimi Anderson put it really well, because she had suffered from anorexia, very badly when she had been younger. And she said, now I just look at my body and I'm proud about it because what it can do. She's had 3 babies. And so I think if we can just get that message across, that our bodies are not, and look at Kath Pendleton. I mean, she would never call herself, a natural looking athlete, but she is superhuman. She swims in a wetsuit in waters that is zero, just above zero, in the Antarctic Circle for a mile, and has got a Guinness World Record, right? She's superhuman. I would survive. I mean, I was talking to her about it the other day. How long would I survive? I mean, maybe 2 minutes if I was lucky.
Yeah.
So I think if we can be proud of our bodies for what they do rather than how they look, and that if they look great, that's a byproduct. That's
Mm.
how we change things.
That's such a great attitude. Yeah, be proud of our bodies for what they do. One of the women, well, there's so many women who strike a chord. They all do, really. But tell us about the woman who took you indoor climbing.
Oh, Anusha Hussain, so she's a paraclimber, and she's got very serious different health conditions. She's got one arm, she's missing one arm below an elbow. I think it's called I had to remember for the audible Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. But anyway, it's a syndrome which basically makes her super flexible, but that means she could dislocate her knee if she just got up the sofa. So really, really difficult. She's also had cancer, so lots of complex medical issues. And she took me indoor climbing. I've never been indoor climbing before. And she talks about in the book very movingly about when she's on the wall, that she sort of has this amazing relationship with her body and the wall, where everything else, all those hardships that she has been through and goes through, just fall away. And she's totally immersed in it. at one with it. And she talks about the wall being a mirror. So if she's had a bad day, she won't climb well, but if she's had a good day, she will. And it was really wonderful to hear her A, talk about it, and B, move on the wall. She was utterly amazing. I mean, she's going up vertically, but she looked to me, I mean, so fluid and so brilliant. It was a really impressive and quite emotional day being with her. But yeah, it was really, and I think hopefully what you get from the book is that all these women are doing something that makes them feel incredible. It's their passion, like Anousheh or Kath, for example, is the ice swimmer. They're doing something that they love, and they're not doing it because some of them want to be the best, but not many of the women in my book. They just want to do it because that's where they feel, and I feel personally when I'm doing sport as well, endurance sport, the most happy in themselves. And
Yeah.
I'm speaking for them now, so that's a responsibility. But I think that's the key in the book, that they're doing this because they love it, not because of anything else.
And yet they all have such incredibly full, rich, chaotic
Yeah.
lives outside of whatever this challenge is. How they make time for it is astonishing, and in itself is really, really amazing. Are there any of the challenges was there anything that the production team, for example, at the publishers wanted you to do that you just said, absolutely no way, I can't do that?
I love that you said production team. I mean, there was no one. It's
Oh,
me.
okay, fine. It was you. The publishers didn't give you any
No,
any input?
I have my lovely editor,
Oh, good,
one editor,
good.
Matt. I mean, and we know that. So Matt, and I've known Matt because he was the person who asked me to write Dare to Try, and I'm so fond of him. We get on incredibly well. Yeah, there was one thing. He wanted me to fly in a rocket to space. Go to space because I wouldn't fit, okay, of course you have to train to be an astronaut, but for me it's about the things I love are putting, my own body being able to do this stuff. And obviously I can't do it as well as all the rest of them. But yeah, so space was ruled out by me mostly because it wasn't physical enough.
Well,
I
I
mean,
also think, how long would your deadline have had to have been if you'd put that one in there?
where is the
You'd have had a
budget?
lot of writing time, but
Budget for it.
yeah, that's true.
Maybe next time.
We're obviously going to get Richard Branson or Elon
I
Musk to
don't
sponsor you
know.
or something. That's hilarious. Wow, I think that was possibly outside the realms of possibility.
Yeah.
We've had a query here. Is there anything you absolutely wouldn't do? You're very, very brave.
Oh, well, go into space.
Nothing else that you just think, no, I just can't.
I'm not that keen on like I wouldn't really like to jump out of an aeroplane, I don't think.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think what it is for me, I sort of like to think, I mean, there's lots of things I can't do, but I'd like to have some physical ability to think or find my way out of things. But if you jump out of the plane, the parachute goes wrong.
Yeah,
Anyway, so
yeah,
that's probably not a
absolutely.
rational fear, but I don't want to do it.
So which of the challenges that you did made you really want to do them again?
Oh, the free diving. Oh my gosh. I think this is one of the most challenging chapters for claustrophobics reading the book.
Yeah.
But I found my sport. I found my sport. I mean, you having listened to me for the last 45 minutes or so, you'll realize that swimming is a thing for me. I love swimming. I love open water swimming. Absolutely my passion. And so Kath, again, going back to Kath, the ice swimmer, obviously I can swim like she can, but I can't be in the ice like she can. So I said to her, what are we going to do? And she said, right, let's go free diving under ice.
Under ice in the dark. I mean, you
Yeah, we
just said
didn't
free
mean it to
diving
be
at
in
the
the
beginning.
dark.
Wow.
The dark wasn't the thing. It wasn't meant to be like that. Anyway, so free diving is for those of you who don't know, or you might have seen Avatar, that's what they're doing in Avatar. So free diving is you go underwater on your own breath. So there's no oxygen, there's no tanks with you or anything. And so you can only be under the water as long as you can hold your breath. So number one, you never do this alone. Number two, it is extremely dangerous and you need to be qualified. So Kath and I both then qualified as free divers. And so my first free dive, which wasn't in a swimming pool, was going to be in Finland. I knew that. And when we set off, we were pretty nervous about the whole thing. We hadn't really realized that when we arrived at the free dive, it would be pitch dark. So when we got there, we walked across a frozen lake, crunching on the snow, and I can hear the snow, and That's all wrong for starters. Why would you walk on a frozen lake? And then there are these triangles cut in the ice in the frozen lake, fires burning either side. I love this chapter, by the way. And we basically, what we had to do was go into the ice, into, again, darkness like I've never seen before, this sort of abyss, pull ourselves under, which is about 1 meter deep, 1 meter thick, the ice. And then immediately, you'll know because you read the book, I got pressed up against the ice because I was so buoyant, couldn't swim. And then you're meant to swim 15 meters on your breath before you pop out the other side. Yeah. So it was, Kath said, it was a bit like learning to ski on a dry ski slope and then doing your first black run in the dark, the first run you do.
Absolutely terrifying. And yet you want to do it
Oh
again.
my gosh. I mean, you know, and please do read the book. Thank you. You know, you'll know that 25 seconds felt like 25 minutes, and there was a panic attack in that 25 seconds. But I just came up laughing, said, I want to do it again, went straight back and did it again. And Kath and I, we haven't quite made the plan yet, but we will definitely, I mean, free diving for me is just not necessarily under the ice in the dark, but to be able to dive down in the sea in a beautiful, warm waters and dive all the way, you know, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 meters down, swim along. It's just heaven for me. It's just my idea of absolute heaven.
And
A
you
bit
had
like a
to learn,
mermaid.
yeah, exactly. You had to learn special breathing techniques
Yeah,
for
yeah.
this. Do you think that stood you in good stead? Have you found yourself using it in other
I
stress?
do. I use those breathing techniques a lot. So with the free diving, you have to hold your breath on so you breathe in, and you have to hold your breath when your lungs are completely full, which is sort of strange. You sort of think you need breathe out, but don't. You actually hold your breath when your lungs are really full. And it's very, you know, if you can do it. Again, don't do this on your own, or do
No,
it supervised, please. Okay, everybody, do this supervised. You know, I guess it's a breathing technique, and often I do, you know, for example, if I'm trying to get to sleep or something, I'll hold my breath. And I learned, so when I first started, I'm not sure I could even do a minute, and I don't do it regularly, but I got it up to 2 minutes and 40 seconds. But I read the other day something like the longest breath hold is something like 25 minutes.
Wow.
And you learn lots of stuff about yourself that you know, even your thoughts use up oxygen, so you have to be very, very zen. So it's
Gosh,
very calming, very, very calming. And of course, the last thing that you're going to be when you arrive in a dark lake and trying to get into an abyss of darkness is going to be calm. So everything was wrong. You know, your heart rate's going up, your breathing's going up. It's bonkers.
We've just been asked a question. How did you know which direction to go in?
Good point. So you are actually tied. So you have a lanyard on your wrist, which is about 1.5 meters long, which is tied to a rope in between. But we couldn't see. So you sort of knew, did I hold onto the rope? I can't remember. You just headed off in that direction. And if you went the wrong way, you would get pulled. But I
Right.
don't think I was holding onto the rope. I was probably pretty aware of it though.
So we've mentioned lots of fascinating things. As you say, there's cycling across Argentina, you've got hiking, the overnight Dartmoor crossing. That's
Yeah.
really fascinating because it's one of the ones that sounds, when you read the title, oh, you know, that's going to be a bit easier. But it really wasn't, was
It
it?
sounds innocuous, doesn't it? We're just
Yeah.
going to go for a walk across Dartmoor. What can be hard about that? Belinda Kirk, who I went with, and she's got a great book called Adventure Revolution, I think it's called. She's a great believer, I am, in the sort of transformative power of adventure, and how, you know, the things you learn when you're pushing your boundaries, you can take back into other parts of your life. Anyway, so she said, she'd never done she's done expeditions all over the world. Again, she's got another Guinness World Record for rowing around Britain. She's absolutely brilliant, you know, expedition leader, explorer, amazing. She said, oh, let's walk across Dartmoor. Again, I thought, how hard can that be? Well, she decided to do a 3-day walk in 2 days. So we're kind of upping the ante and carrying all my own stuff, you know, and carrying 22 kilos of, you know, whatever I had, my food, my tent, my sleeping bag, all the rest of it. And
And
we
it sounded like that was the hardest bit, carrying everything.
yeah, I mean, I just wasn't trained for that properly, really. How you would, I suppose you'd train carrying it, which I hadn't done, but carrying it was really hard. And then Also, it's, I mean, because there's there's live firing on Dartmoor, so you have to go, depending on where the army are firing, you have to go. We had to go a really long circuitous route, actually, which added, I think, another 10K or something. Do you remember, Lucinda? I can't remember how
Yeah,
much
yeah.
it added.
I remember thinking, oh
It
my goodness,
added a lot, maybe another two
that point,
hours.
and you have to keep going. Yeah.
And she just took us off road. She just, because she's, she is, her ability to navigate is unbelievable. But we got lost, we got stuck in a bog, and we would just go right, head up that hill, and that hill was no path, great big tuffets of grass, which the tuffet would be that high, and then the bottom of the earth would be this, just, honestly, I fell over. It was really tough, and I think I didn't realize how much I should have. Food and nutrition is really important in all of that. By the time I finished, I felt worse than I have after an extreme triathlon, which has taken me 16 hours. So it was really, really hardcore, actually, but
That
brilliant. I loved it.
chapter really struck me because as I had thought, oh, this, oh, phew,
Yeah.
she's giving herself a bit of a break here, and that absolutely wasn't the case. There was a great motto that I liked from your Cycling London to Paris with Sophie
Yes.
Storm Roberts, and I love that this was what she was on her shirt, I believe.
Yes.
One life, live it. One day I will not be able to do this. Today is not that day.
Which I just think is hugely empowering, isn't it? And
Yeah,
we
very.
did this brilliant. I mean, some of you may have done it. It's like we cycle from London to Paris. I mean, I love the way I just say, "Oh, we cycled from London to
Yeah.
Paris." That's obviously clearly a long way. And yeah, she's absolutely brilliant. What I love about her, and she's done amazing bike ride across Europe, and then climbing all the mountains in between as well. She has this sort of infectious ability to inspire other people to do sport, and people had come from all over the world literally to go on this bike ride with her. And that one life, live it, one day I won't be able to do this, is such a great motto, isn't it? That some of the stuff I do, just because it might feel hard, it might feel challenging, but how brilliant that my little two legs have got me all the way from London to Paris, minus the bit in the ferry.
Absolutely. And that Goldster is all about this. I mean, Goldster is really about enjoying, making the most out of life at every single age and not being held back by age. And you yourself, you became a professional athlete in your 40s. I mean,
Well, I
that's
wouldn't say
normally when people are
professional.
retiring.
I wouldn't say
Well,
professional, but yeah, competing in the world. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think if you're competing in that kind of level of competition, I think you can call yourself professional.
Well,
Um,
yeah. So 45, and Mimi is 60. She's a grandmother. I think she's got 4 grandchildren, and there she is cycling across Argentina with me. I know right now she's on a massive. Unfortunately, because of the book launch, I can't be with her on another massive bike ride across the Western Front. That age is not going to hold her back. And I think, what I've done more in the last 10 years than I did in the first 45. And yeah, there's no reason. I mean, I have injuries. I work hard to get over them. And that's, sometimes they're very, what are they? They're disappointing, they're painful. But I just always think, let's just try again. Why not? Why not? If it means if I have to have a knee operation, go back to couch to 5K, give it a go. So I did that had a knee operation in July, and then my daughter and I ran the London Marathon in April.
Amazing. Wow. So I was going to say, what motivates you to exercise and push yourself? And for people who
Oh,
might never have had an exercise regime or who've given up and think they can't regain their fitness because they've got older or because they've been injured, and what is it that
yeah,
pushed you to do that, do you think?
that's a really important question. So for me, what I get out of it, and I know that both physically and mentally, it makes me happier on a daily basis and much stronger. So on the strong stuff, and we've touched a bit on it, haven't we? It sounds really silly, but I mean, one of my new things is going to the gym and going to that part of the gym that I used to be really scared of, where all of the very muscly men are, and I go in there now, which is just
Brilliant.
and I just think I kind of know, I sort of know what to do, so I'm going to go in there. But for me, so for example, being strong means that literally running around London with my bag full of the shortlist of the women's prize for books in my bag. I can lift my suitcase on this train. I can run when I'm slightly late for it. And it sounds ridiculous, but that's important. So anyway,
Absolutely.
so physically I'm stronger. And mentally, every single time I went for a swim today because I've got a big swim coming up. Every single time I do, if I'm feeling, I don't know, whether it's stressed, like when I was at work, for example, or naggy or slightly anxious, I just know that every time I go and do a bit of exercise, whether it's swimming, running, biking, walking in the beautiful sunshine that we've got now, or yoga, for example, I know it will just help me calm me down and make me feel better and happier. So those are what motivates me. And I think, it's never too late to start. And start small, start with, as I said, I've done couch to 5K, I think 3 times. Start small, and you don't have, you don't have to have big goals. Everybody's goals are different as well. Do you see what I mean? You don't need to be running marathons. Your marathon might be getting to Tesco, but just go for it and just feel the benefits of, I just get huge benefits. I wish I could just pass it on like medicine to everybody.
Oh, that's just perfect. And for those of you who are watching this and you're thinking, oh, I can't do this, try a Goldster class, because you'll be amazed. They're set for all levels, and they're exactly for people like you, whoever you are, there is going to be a class for you. And we've got a question here. What do your family think of all your adventurous exploits?
Well,
You've got
put it
daughters.
this way, when my husband married me, I wasn't like this. I think I was always adventurous. I just had a bit of a mini break. What do they think? I think they're really proud. I think they think I'm a little bit nuts. They know when I say I'm going to do something that it's going to happen, even though they might think that I'm, might have pushed it a bit too far. They're hugely supportive. And, it's one of the reasons I did start doing sport was because I read research which said, if you want your daughter to do sport, the mums need to do it. I've taken that little bit to the extreme, but my daughter's just run the London Marathon. So
brilliant. And we've got one, I think probably the last question from the audience here. More women are now competing in motor racing. Would you try that?
Now, that's a good question. Yes.
Ooh, excellent. You heard
I'm
it
not
here
sure whether I want to be the driver, or I think I want to be the driver. Not my navigation skills aren't great. I mean, that's what I'm imagining. I'm imagining you two in a car. Yeah, that's the kind
I
of
have no
motor racing.
idea, but
That's the kind of
I
motor
reckon
racing
they were thinking
I
you
would
being
like
a
to
driver,
do.
so.
Off-road rally driving. That's what I'd like to do.
Brilliant. So I was going to ask you what your next challenge is, but maybe we've just found it for you.
I don't know. My next challenge is this weekend. I am doing a 4.5K swim, which obviously is quite a long way, especially as all I've done pretty much all year is train for the marathon, and I've only done 6 swims. So
wow, you developed your muscles in all sorts of different ways, and you're now.
No, I've been swimming today, and it's sore.
Well, good luck with that. Thank you so much. I know you are super busy, and particularly if you're training for that too. You've been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for listening, and thank you to whoever's read it, and please do read it. I think hopefully you'll enjoy it.
So Fearless is out from Bloomsbury right now. It came out on the 25th of May, and it's got some really, really fascinating women in it. So please do read it. I'm just going to tell you very quickly what's coming up this week. I'm back on Thursday speaking to the fabulous biographer and historian Shravani Basu about her book Victoria and Abdul. She's a great writer. Her books are beautiful. She's actually been on to talk to us on Goldster before, so come along and enjoy that. And then by great popular demand from the Goldster membership, I'm back on Friday interviewing, guess what, Humphrey Hawksley, my co-presenter. For those of you who haven't been on Goldster before, we are actually very distantly related, but very distantly. I'm going to be interviewing Humphrey about his thriller series starring the fabulous hero Rake Ozena. So join me on Thursday with Shravani and Friday with Humphrey. Louise, good luck with all your endeavours. We can't wait for the next book, and do come back and talk to us when you've done it.
Thank you. And thanks for all your messages. I'm just reading them through. Thank you so much, everybody.
Lovely
Thanks, Lucinda.
messages there. Thank you, everybody. Bye.